I was rushed to the trauma clinic unconscious. The doctors called my daughter-in-law, but she said, "I'm busy." Those papers I signed transferred everything into a trust that would help other elderly folks who found themselves forgotten by their families. Melissa thought she was going to inherit millions when I died. She had no idea I'd just given it all away to help people like me. Have you ever felt abandoned by family when you needed them most? Hi viewers, kindly tell us where you're watching from and what time it is. Warm welcome to the family, enjoy the story. The trauma clinic in Dallas smelled like bleach and broken dreams when I opened my eyes, but the real nightmare wasn't my fractured ribs, it was what my daughter-in-law said when they called her. "I'm busy. Just call me when it's over." Those 8 words cut deeper than any broken bone. What she didn't know was that I had just transferred our 740-acre ranch into a trust. And I had been recording her conversations for months. Have you ever trusted someone who was counting the days until you died? Have you ever felt invisible in your own family? Has someone you loved ever made you feel like a burden? This is the story of how a forgotten grandmother became the most dangerous woman in Oklahoma. Stay with me, because what happens next will change everything you think you know about family loyalty. Now, let me take you back to where it all began. I woke up in that Dallas trauma center with my jaw wired shut and my ribs screaming every time I breathed. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead like angry wasps, and the smell of disinfectant burned my nose. But none of that pain compared to hearing those 8 words from the nurse's mouth. "Your daughter-in-law said she's busy. Call when it's over." My name is Rose Williams, and at 73 years old, I thought I'd seen every kind of heartbreak this world could serve up. Born in the Mississippi Delta in 1950, I learned early that being a black woman meant swallowing pain with a smile and getting back up when life knocked you down. But lying in that hospital bed, bandaged and broken, I realized some betrayals cut so deep they changed the shape of your soul. The nurse, a kind woman named Janet with gentle hands and tired eyes, tried to soften the blow. "Maybe she's just scared, honey. Sometimes people don't know how to handle these situations." But I knew better. This wasn't fear, this was calculation. Let me tell you about my daughter-in-law, Melissa. 5 feet 2 inches of Houston socialite wrapped in designer clothes and fake smiles. She married my son David 3 years ago, and from day one, she looked at me like I was a piece of furniture that didn't match her decorating scheme. Never once did she call me Mama Rose like David's first wife used to. Never once did she bring her children around for Sunday dinner. And never once did she look me in the eye when she spoke to me. But I'm getting ahead of myself. You need to understand how I got to that hospital bed in the first place. 3 days before my fall, I had been in my lawyer's office in Oklahoma City, signing papers that would protect everything my late husband Richard and I had built together. Our 740-acre ranch wasn't just land, it was legacy. Richard had been dead for 4 years, and I knew my time was coming too. The cancer in my bones was winning, even though I hadn't told anyone yet. Not even David. Those papers I signed transferred everything into a trust that would help other elderly folks who found themselves forgotten by their families. Melissa thought she was going to inherit millions when I died. She had no idea I'd just given it all away to help people like me. That morning, I remember feeling proud of myself for the first time in months. I had done something Richard would have been proud of. Something that would outlive both of us and actually matter. I drove home to my little house on the edge of our property, humming an old Aretha Franklin song and thinking about making cornbread for dinner. But when I pulled into my driveway, Melissa's white BMW was already there. She was standing on my front porch, tapping her manicured nails against the railing and checking her phone. When she saw me, she didn't wave. She didn't smile. She just watched me with those cold blue eyes as I struggled to get out of my truck with my arthritis-stiff joints. "We need to talk, Rose," she said. Not Mama Rose. Not even Mrs. Williams. Just Rose. I should have known something was wrong right then. Melissa never came to see me alone. She always brought David as a buffer, like she needed protection from catching whatever disease she thought old age was. "About what, child?" I asked, fumbling with my keys. About your future. About David's future. About what happens when you're not around anymore. The way she said it made my skin crawl. Like she was discussing the weather instead of my death. We sat in my living room, me in Richard's old recliner, her perched on the edge of my couch like she was afraid it might stain her dress. She talked for 20 minutes about family financial planning and making sure everyone's taken care of. But what she was really saying was, when are you going to die, and how much money are you leaving us? I played dumb. I nodded and made little sounds of agreement while she outlined her vision for our future. The way she kept saying our ranch and our inheritance made my blood boil, but I kept my face neutral. Something my mama taught me long ago, sometimes the best weapon is letting folks think you're harmless. When she finally left, I felt exhausted in a way that had nothing to do with my cancer. It was the exhaustion of being seen as an obstacle instead of a person. Of being valued only for what I could leave behind, not for what I still had to offer. That night, I called my lawyer and told him to expedite the trust paperwork. If Melissa was already planning my funeral, I was going to make sure my death disappointed her in every possible way. 2 days later, I woke up in Dallas with a broken jaw and no memory of how I got there. The doctor said I had been found unconscious on my porch steps by my neighbor, Mrs. Patterson. She told them she heard me scream around 10 at night, then saw me lying at the bottom of my steps when she came outside to check. My injuries were consistent with a bad fall, broken ribs, fractured jaw, severe bruising on my hip and shoulder. But here's what bothered me, I never went outside after dark anymore. My eyesight wasn't good enough, and my balance was shaky even in daylight. So what was I doing on those steps at 10 o'clock at night? The nurse whispered something that made my blood freeze. Your daughter-in-law asked if you had signed any papers lately. Have you ever felt abandoned by family when you needed them most? Share your story below. That question about the papers hit me like a slap across my already bruised face. Why would Melissa ask about papers when I was lying in a hospital bed fighting for my life? Unless she already knew what I had done. Unless she knew exactly why I fell. The morphine made my thoughts fuzzy, but one thing came through crystal clear, I was in danger. Not from my injuries, but from the people who were supposed to love me most. I lay there in that sterile room, listening to machines beep and nurses shuffle past my door, trying to piece together what happened on my porch. The last thing I remembered was making myself a cup of chamomile tea around 9:30. I always had tea before bed, it was a ritual Richard and I had shared for 30 years of marriage. But that tea tasted strange that night. Bitter in a way chamomile never was. A chill ran down my spine that had nothing to do with the hospital air conditioning. Had someone put something in my tea? Had someone wanted me confused and unsteady when I went outside? But who would call me outside after dark? The answer came to me slowly, like puzzle pieces falling into place. David. My son could have called and said there was an emergency. Could have said he needed me to come outside right away. In my drugged state, I would have obeyed without thinking. And Melissa could have been waiting. I closed my eyes and tried to remember David's voice, tried to recall if my phone had rung that night. But the drugs in my system, whatever they were, had stolen those memories from me. That's when I felt it. Under my pillow, my fingers found the small digital recorder I always carried with me. Even in the ambulance, even unconscious, I had somehow held on to it. The paramedics must have thought it was just another old lady's medical device. But this little machine held 3 weeks of conversations with David and Melissa. 3 weeks of listening to them discuss my deteriorating condition and their plans for when the time comes. 3 weeks of evidence that my own family saw me as nothing more than an obstacle to their financial freedom. I pressed play and listened through my earbuds, the volume low so the nurses wouldn't hear. Melissa's voice, sharp and impatient, "She's not getting any younger, David. And with her medical bills piling up, there won't be anything left for us if we wait too long." My son's voice, weaker but agreeable, "I know, baby. But she seems healthy for her age. Could be years before. Years we don't have. The ranch is worth $3 million, maybe more. That's our children's college fund. That's our retirement. That's our future she's sitting on like some old dragon guarding treasure. I had to pause the recording because my hands were shaking too hard to hold the device steady. My own son, talking about my death like a business transaction. My daughter-in-law, calculating the value of my life in dollars and cents. But the worst was yet to come. David's voice again. What are you suggesting, Mel? We can't just. We don't have to do anything. Accidents happen to old people every day. Especially old people who live alone in big houses with steep porches and take sleeping pills for their pain. She doesn't take sleeping pills. She could start. Slip a little something in her evening tea. Make her unsteady. Confused. Old people fall down their own steps all the time, David. It's practically a cliché. I yanked the earbuds out of my ears so fast they clattered to the floor. The conversation I had just heard was from 6 days ago. 6 days before my fall. Which meant this wasn't some spontaneous accident, this was a plan. A plan to make me fall down my own steps and hope I died from the injuries. The only problem with their plan was that I survived. And now Melissa was asking about papers because she needed to know if her payday was still secure. She needed to know if I had changed my will or set up trusts that would interfere with her inheritance. What she didn't know was that I had done exactly that. And I had recorded every word of her confession. But here's what really got my blood boiling. David knew. My baby boy, the son I had carried for 9 months and raised through scraped knees and broken hearts and high school heartbreak, he knew what she was planning, and he went along with it. I thought about the man Richard had been. Strong, principled, willing to stand up to anyone who threatened his family. When we first got married in 1970, plenty of people in Oklahoma weren't ready for a mixed-race couple building wealth together. Richard faced down threats, boycotts, and worse to protect what we were building. He would have fought anyone who tried to hurt me. But David wasn't his father. David was weak, easily led, and apparently willing to trade his mother's life for his wife's approval. I made a decision in that hospital bed that would have made Richard proud. I wasn't going to be a victim. I wasn't going to lie there and wait for them to try again. I was going to fight back with every breath left in my 73-year-old body. I reached for the phone beside my bed and dialed a number I knew by heart. Detective Williams, Dallas Police Department. Detective, my name is Rose Williams, and I need to report an attempted murder. The silence on the other end of the line stretched for a long moment before she responded. Ma'am, can you hold while I get a pen? And Mrs. Williams? Are you in immediate danger? I looked at the door to my hospital room, thinking about David and Melissa somewhere out there, waiting for news of my condition. Thinking about whether they'd gotten what they wanted, or if they'd need to try again. Yes, I whispered into the phone. I believe I am. What would you do if you discovered someone was waiting for you to die? Fight back or let it go? Detective Williams arrived at my hospital room exactly 47 minutes later. I know because I watched every minute tick by on that wall clock, wondering if David and Melissa would show up first. Wondering if they'd walk through that door with flowers and fake tears, asking the doctors about my prognosis while secretly hoping it was terminal. But Detective Williams got there first, and the moment she walked into my room, I knew I had chosen the right person to trust. She was a black woman about 40 years old with intelligent eyes and strong hands that reminded me of my own mama. She wore a simple gray suit and carried herself like someone who had seen enough evil in this world to recognize it when she heard it, but hadn't let it make her cynical. Mrs. Williams, she said, settling into the chair beside my bed, I need you to tell me everything. Start from the beginning, and don't leave out any detail you think might be important. So I did. I told her about Richard and how we built our ranch from nothing. About David's marriage to Melissa 3 years ago and how everything changed after that. About the trust papers I had signed just days before my fall. About the conversations I had recorded over the past 3 weeks. When I played her the recording of Melissa discussing how to drug my tea and stage my accident, Detective Williams' face went hard as granite. Mrs. Williams, I need to ask you something, and I want you to be completely honest with me. Do you have any enemies? Anyone else who might want to hurt you? I almost laughed, except laughing would have sent fire through my broken ribs. Detective, I'm a 73-year-old woman who spends most of her time reading romance novels and watching cooking shows. The most controversial thing I've done recently is switch from Folgers to Maxwell House coffee. She smiled at that, but her eyes stayed serious. What about the ranch? $3 million is a lot of money. Could there be other people interested in your property? No. Richard and I never had debts, never had business partners who might feel cheated. The only people who stand to benefit from my death are David and Melissa. Detective Williams made notes in a small leather notebook, her pen moving quickly across the pages. Tell me about your relationship with your son. Has he ever been violent toward you? Ever threatened you? That question hit me harder than I expected. No. David's never been violent. He's just weak. He lets Melissa make all the decisions, even when those decisions are wrong. When his first wife was alive, he was different. Stronger. But Maria died in a car accident 5 years ago, and David's been lost ever since. When he met Melissa, I think he was just grateful someone wanted to take care of him. And Melissa? What's her background? She's from Houston. Divorced with 2 teenage kids. Her ex-husband has money, oil money, so she's used to a certain lifestyle. I think she saw David as her ticket back to that lifestyle. Detective Williams looked up from her notes. Mrs. Williams, what you're alleging is attempted murder. If we pursue this, there's no going back. Your relationship with your son will never be the same. Are you prepared for that? I thought about David as a little boy, running through the cornfields with his arms spread wide like airplane wings. I thought about teaching him to ride horses and helping him with his homework at the kitchen table. I thought about dancing with him at his first wedding, so proud of the good man he had become. Then I thought about his voice on that recording, discussing my death like it was a business meeting. Detective Williams, my son stopped being my son the moment he agreed to let his wife kill me. What I'm prepared for is justice. She nodded slowly. Okay. But I have to warn you, proving attempted murder is going to be difficult. We need more than recordings of conversations. We need physical evidence. We need to prove someone actually put drugs in your tea, actually caused your fall. What kind of evidence? Blood tests showing what was in your system that night. Fingerprints on your teacup if it's still in your house. Maybe security footage from your neighbors. But most importantly, we need them to confess to actually doing it, not just planning it. I felt my heart sink. So the recordings aren't enough? They're a good start. They show motive and premeditation. But we need to catch them in the act or get them to admit they actually went through with the plan. That's when the idea hit me. Dangerous, crazy, but possible. Detective, what if I could get them to confess? What if I could make them think their plan worked, that I'm dying, and get them to tell me exactly what they did? Detective Williams leaned forward in her chair. Mrs. Williams, what you're suggesting could put you in serious danger. If they think they failed to kill you the first time, they might try again, I finished for her. I know. But what choice do I have? Let them walk away? Let them inherit my ranch and spend the rest of their lives congratulating themselves on getting away with murder? I pressed my hand against the recorder in my lap, feeling its familiar weight. I made a call that would change everything. Detective, I want to wear a wire. When someone underestimates you, do you prove them wrong quietly or loudly? Detective Williams stared at me like I had just suggested we rob a bank together. Mrs. Williams, you're talking about potentially dangerous undercover work. You're 73 years old, you're injured, and these people have already tried to kill you once. Which is exactly why they won't expect me to fight back, I said, surprised by how steady my own voice sounded. They think I'm just a helpless old woman who doesn't understand what's happening to her. Let them keep thinking that. She pulled out her phone and made a call to someone she called Lieutenant Rodriguez. I couldn't hear the other side of the conversation, but from Detective Williams' responses, it was clear her boss wasn't thrilled with the idea either. Yes, sir, I understand the liability issues. No, sir, she's not officially a confidential informant. Yes, sir, I know her age makes this complicated. When she hung up, she looked at me with a mixture of admiration and concern. Mrs. Williams, my lieutenant thinks this is a bad idea. So do I, honestly. But he's willing to let us try, under very specific conditions. What conditions? First, you're never alone with them. We'll have officers positioned nearby at all times. Second, we control when and where these conversations happen, probably here in the hospital where we can monitor everything. Third, the moment we think you're in danger, we shut it down. I nodded. That's acceptable. And fourth, she continued, you need to understand that anything could go wrong. They could get suspicious. They could become violent. They could decide to finish what they started right there in your hospital room. I thought about that for a moment, weighing the risks against the alternative of letting them walk free. Detective Williams, can I tell you something about my late husband? She nodded. Richard was the bravest man I ever knew. When we got married in 1970, interracial couples weren't exactly welcomed with open arms in Oklahoma. We faced threats, vandalism, people trying to run us off our land. There were nights I was so scared I couldn't sleep. I paused, remembering those early years when love felt like an act of rebellion. But Richard used to tell me something that I've never forgotten. He said, Rose, the only way evil wins is when good people are too scared to fight back. He taught me that courage isn't the absence of fear, it's doing what's right even when you're terrified. Detective Williams was quiet for a long moment. Then she pulled a business card from her wallet and wrote a number on the back. This is my personal cell phone. You call me day or night if anything feels wrong. And I mean anything, if you get a bad feeling, if they look at you funny, if your instincts tell you something's off, you call me immediately. I will. We'll need a few days to set up the equipment and coordinate with the hospital staff. Can you keep pretending to be weak and confused until then? I almost smiled at that. Honey, I've been pretending to be weaker than I am for the past 3 years. Every time Melissa made some snide comment about my age or my health, I bit my tongue and acted like I didn't understand what she was really saying. Acting helpless is something I've gotten very good at. That afternoon, a young man named Marcus Chin arrived at my hospital room. Detective Williams introduced him as a public defender who specialized in elder abuse cases. He was probably 35 years old with kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses and a way of speaking that made complicated legal concepts sound simple. Mrs. Williams, he said, settling into the chair Detective Williams had vacated, I've reviewed your case, and I want you to know that what happened to you is both criminal and civil. Even if the criminal charges don't stick, we can pursue this in civil court. What's the difference? Criminal court is where they go to jail. Civil court is where they pay you money. In criminal court, we need to prove guilt beyond a reasonable doubt. In civil court, we just need to prove it's more likely than not that they tried to harm you. He opened his briefcase and pulled out a thick folder. I've been doing some research on your daughter-in-law. Melissa Rodriguez, that's her maiden name, has been married 3 times. Her first husband died in what was ruled an accidental drowning. Her second husband, the wealthy one from Houston, divorced her after she was caught forging checks from his business account. My blood went cold. You're saying she's done this before? I'm saying she has a pattern of targeting older men with money and finding ways to benefit when they die or when their marriages end badly. Your son fits that pattern perfectly. Marcus leaned forward, his voice dropping to almost a whisper. Mrs. Williams, I think your son is in as much danger as you were. If Melissa is willing to kill you for an inheritance, what do you think she'll do to David once she has control of the ranch? The thought of David in danger should have filled me with maternal concern. Instead, I felt something darker, a cold satisfaction that he might finally understand what it felt like to be betrayed by someone you trusted. But then I remembered the little boy who used to curl up in my lap during thunderstorms, and my heart softened slightly. What do we do about David? We save him, Marcus said simply. But first, we have to save you. He pulled out a small device that looked like a hearing aid. This is what you'll be wearing. It's virtually undetectable, and it will record everything within a 15-foot radius. I took the device in my hand, feeling its weight, so small, yet capable of bringing down the people who had tried to destroy me. Marcus, can I ask you something personal? Of course. Why are you helping me? You could be making a lot more money working for clients who can actually pay your fees. He was quiet for a moment, then pulled out his wallet and showed me a photograph of an elderly Asian woman. My grandmother, he said softly. She died 3 years ago after my uncle convinced her to sign over her house to him. He promised to take care of her, then put her in the cheapest nursing home he could find and sold her house for drug money. His voice hardened. She died alone and confused, wondering why her family had abandoned her. I became a lawyer so that other people's grandmothers don't have to die the way mine did. I looked at this young man who was willing to risk his career to help a stranger, and I felt something I hadn't experienced in years: hope. Well then, I said, fitting the recording device into my ear, let's catch some killers. Have you ever had to choose between family peace and justice? What did you choose? The next morning, I woke up to the sound of familiar voices in the hallway outside my room. My heart started racing before my brain even processed what I was hearing: David's voice, low and worried, talking to someone at the nurse's station. How is she today? Any change in her condition? She's stable, the nurse replied. But she's been asking a lot of questions about what happened. Seems confused about the details. Perfect. Let them think I was confused. Let them think I was just another helpless old woman who didn't understand what was happening to her. I quickly fitted the recording device into my ear and pressed the tiny button Marcus had shown me. The light flashed green. Everything they said from this moment forward would be captured. David walked into my room carrying a bouquet of yellow roses, my favorite flowers. The same flowers he brought me every Mother's Day for the past 30 years. For a split second, looking at his familiar face and those gentle brown eyes that reminded me so much of his father, I almost forgot what he had done. Almost. Hey, Mama, he said softly, settling into the chair beside my bed. How are you feeling? I let my voice come out weak and shaky. David? Oh honey, I'm so glad you're here. I've been having the strangest dreams, and I can't remember what happened to me. His face relaxed slightly. Good. He believed I was genuinely confused. You fell, Mama. Down your front steps. Mrs. Patterson found you and called the ambulance. Fell? I frowned, trying to look puzzled. But I don't remember going outside. Why would I go outside at night? The doctors think you might have been sleepwalking. Or maybe you heard something that made you want to check outside. Interesting. He was already establishing the cover story, that I went outside on my own, that nobody called me or lured me out there. Where's Melissa? I asked. Is she coming to see me? Something flickered across David's face, guilt, maybe, or nervousness. She's dealing with some things at home. But she sends her love. She sends her love? I let my voice crack a little. David, I almost died. Doesn't she want to see me? Of course she does, Mama. She's just, you know how she gets emotional about medical stuff. It's hard for her to see you like this. What a load of garbage. The woman who had planned my murder was too emotional to visit me in the hospital. I reached out and took David's hand, the hand that had held mine when he learned to walk, that I had bandaged when he scraped his knees, that had worn my father's ring at his wedding to Maria. David, honey, I need to ask you something, and I want you to be honest with me. He tensed up. What is it, Mama? Am I going to die? The question hung in the air between us like smoke. I watched his face carefully, looking for any sign of hope or disappointment in his eyes. Don't talk like that, he said, but his voice sounded hollow. The doctors say you're going to be fine. You just need time to heal. But what if I don't heal? What if something happens to me? I squeezed his hand. David, I need to know that you and Melissa will be okay. I need to know you'll take care of the ranch. Now his eyes lit up, just for a second, but I caught it. The mention of the ranch got his attention in a way my potential death didn't. Mama, don't worry about the ranch. We'll figure all that out when the time comes. When the time comes. Not if something happens to you. Not when you're feeling better. When the time comes. I've been thinking, I continued, my voice getting weaker. Maybe I should make things easier for everyone. Maybe I should sign some papers now, while I can still think clearly. David's hand tightened on mine. What kind of papers? Will changes. Power of attorney. You know, so you and Melissa don't have to deal with lawyers and courts and all that mess if something happens. I watched the excitement build in his eyes, even as he tried to keep his expression neutral and concerned. Mama, you don't need to worry about that right now. Focus on getting better. But I could hear it in his voice. He wanted me to sign those papers. He wanted me to make his inheritance official before I had a chance to change my mind or get better. That's when Melissa walked through the door. She moved like a woman walking into her own funeral, slow, deliberate, with just the right amount of fake sadness painted on her face. She wore a black dress that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent and carried a small bouquet of white lilies. Lilies. The flowers people bring to funerals. Rose, she said, her voice dripping with false sympathy. Oh my goodness, look at you. You poor thing. She didn't hug me. Didn't kiss my forehead. Didn't even touch my hand. She just stood at the foot of my bed like she was viewing a body at a wake. How are you feeling, dear? She asked. Confused, I said honestly. I can't remember what happened. Melissa and David exchanged a quick look, so fast most people would have missed it. But I had been watching for it. That's normal after a head injury, Melissa said. Sometimes it's better not to remember traumatic events. Your mind is protecting you. Protecting me. Right. David was just telling me I should think about signing some papers, I said, watching Melissa's reaction. To make things easier for you too. Her eyes went bright as diamonds. Oh, Rose, you don't need to worry about that now. But if it would give you peace of mind. It would, I said. I hate the thought of you two having to fight with lawyers and courts if something happens to me. Nothing's going to happen to you, David said, but he was already pulling out his phone. But maybe we should call that lawyer, just to put your mind at ease. Mr. Patterson? I asked, naming my actual lawyer. No, Melissa said quickly. He's so far away in Oklahoma City. There's a lawyer here in Dallas who specializes in this kind of thing. David found him online. Of course they did. They had found a lawyer who would draw up papers giving them everything they wanted, no questions asked. That sounds perfect, I said. When can he come? I'll call him right now, David said, stepping out into the hallway. As soon as he left, Melissa moved closer to my bed. For the first time since she had walked in, she actually looked directly into my eyes. Rose, she said, her voice dropping to almost a whisper, I want you to know that David and I will take very good care of the ranch. We'll honor your memory. My memory. Like I was already dead. That means so much to me, I whispered back. I know you'll do what's right. She smiled, the first genuine smile I had seen from her since she walked in. It was the smile of a woman who thought she had one. We will. And Rose? I want you to know that you don't have to suffer. If the pain gets too bad, if you're tired of fighting, it's okay to let go. There it was. Permission to die. Encouragement to die. I closed my eyes and let a single tear roll down my cheek. Thank you, Melissa. That's the kindest thing anyone has said to me in days. When David came back into the room, his face was flushed with excitement. Good news, he said. The lawyer can be here tomorrow morning. We can get everything taken care of while you're feeling strong enough to sign. Tomorrow? I said weakly. That seems so fast. Mama, you said yourself you want to get this handled. And honestly, looking at you today, you seem much clearer than you were yesterday. We should do this while you're having a good day. While I was having a good day. Before I got better. Before I changed my mind. You're right, I said. Let's do it tomorrow. After they left, I lay in that hospital bed feeling something I hadn't felt since Richard died, alive. Truly, completely alive. The thrill of outsmarting people who thought I was too old and too weak to fight back was better than any drug the doctors could have given me. Marcus arrived an hour later, and when I played him the recording, his eyes went wide. Mrs. Williams, this is incredible. They're not even trying to hide their motives. They think I'm dying, I said. They think I'm confused and helpless. They're getting careless. The lawyer they want to bring in tomorrow, we need to be ready for that. If you sign papers under duress or while you're medicated, we can challenge them later. But it's better if we stop them before they get that far. I thought about Melissa's smile when she thought she had one. I thought about David's excitement when he mentioned the lawyer. Marcus, I said, what if we let them bring their lawyer? What if we let them think they're going to get what they want, and then we spring our trap? He looked at me with something that might have been admiration. Mrs. Williams, you're not just surviving this. You're enjoying it. I thought about that for a moment. Was I enjoying it? Was there something wrong with me for feeling excited about bringing down my own family? Then I remembered Melissa's voice on that recording, discussing my death like a business transaction. I remembered her standing at the foot of my bed telling me it was okay to die. Yes, I said finally. I am enjoying it. And I'm not sorry about that. Could you forgive your child for wanting you gone? Or would you fight back? Detective Williams returned the next morning with a woman I didn't recognize, a tall, elegant black woman in her 50s wearing a navy blue suit and carrying a leather briefcase that probably cost more than my monthly grocery budget. Mrs. Williams, Detective Williams said, I'd like you to meet Judge Patricia Coleman. She's retired from the bench, but she still does consulting work for cases like yours. Judge Coleman had the kind of presence that commanded respect, the way she held her shoulders, the direct way she looked at you when she spoke, the confidence in her voice that came from years of making decisions that changed people's lives. Mrs. Williams, she said, settling into the chair beside my bed, Detective Williams has filled me in on your situation. I want you to know that what's happening to you is more common than most people realize. It is? Elder abuse, financial exploitation, even attempted murder for inheritance money. I saw dozens of cases like this during my time on the bench. The sad truth is that family members are often the most dangerous people in an elderly person's life. She opened her briefcase and pulled out a thick folder. I've been researching your daughter-in-law's background. There are some things you need to know. My stomach tightened. What kind of things? Melissa Rodriguez has been married 4 times, not 3 like your lawyer discovered. Her first husband, Robert Chin, died in 1998 from what was ruled an accidental drug overdose. He was 62, she was 28, and he had just changed his life insurance policy to make her the primary beneficiary. 4 husbands? Her second husband, James Mitchell, died in that drowning I mentioned. Her third husband, the wealthy one from Houston, divorced her after she was caught embezzling from his oil company. Your son David is husband number 4. Judge Coleman pulled out a photograph and handed it to me. It showed a much younger Melissa at what looked like a funeral, wearing black and crying into a handkerchief. This was taken at Robert Chen's funeral. Notice anything interesting about her grief? I studied the photo carefully. Melissa was crying, but something about her posture seemed wrong. She was turned slightly toward the camera, like she was making sure someone was capturing her sorrow for posterity. She's performing, I said. Exactly. A grieving widow doesn't usually pose for photographs at her husband's funeral. Judge Coleman showed me more photos. Melissa at James Mitchell's funeral, looking appropriately devastated. Melissa leaving the courthouse after her divorce from husband number 3, looking defeated and wronged. This woman has made a career out of marrying older men with money and finding ways to profit when those marriages end. Your son fits her pattern perfectly. But David isn't that much older than she is. No, but he has something she wants, access to you and your ranch. I believe she married David specifically to get close to your family's wealth. The thought made me sick to my stomach. My son hadn't just been weak and easily manipulated, he had been targeted by a professional predator. Judge Coleman, does David know about her other husbands? I doubt it. Women like Melissa are very good at reinventing themselves. She probably told him she was married once before, to an abusive man she was lucky to escape from. She probably made herself seem like the victim. Detective Williams leaned forward. Mrs. Williams, this changes everything. We're not just dealing with a greedy daughter-in-law anymore. We're dealing with a serial killer who specializes in murdering family members for money. The words hit me like a physical blow. Serial killer. My daughter-in-law wasn't just greedy or cruel, she was a professional killer who had done this before. How many people has she killed? We can't prove she killed anyone yet, Judge Coleman said carefully. But 2 suspicious deaths and a pattern of financial exploitation, it's enough to make us very concerned about your safety. And David's safety too, I said, surprising myself with how much I still cared about my son's welfare. Yes. If Melissa is willing to kill you for an inheritance, your son could be next. Especially if he starts asking inconvenient questions or getting in her way. Judge Coleman closed her folder and looked at me seriously. Mrs. Williams, I want to be very clear about something. What you're planning to do, wearing a wire, trying to get confessions, is extremely dangerous. You're dealing with someone who has potentially killed 3 people. If she realizes what you're doing, she'll try to kill me again, I finished. Or worse. She might hurt you in ways that don't show up on medical examinations. Psychological torture, financial abuse, isolation from anyone who might help you. I thought about that for a moment. Then I thought about Richard and what he would have done if someone had threatened his family. Judge Coleman, can I ask you something personal? Of course. In all your years on the bench, did you ever see justice fail because good people were too scared to fight back? She was quiet for a long moment. More often than I care to remember. Then you understand why I have to do this. She nodded slowly. I do. But I also want to make sure you understand the risks. I understand them. But I also understand that if I don't fight back, she'll move on to her next victim. Maybe that's David. Maybe it's some other lonely man who thinks he's found love. But it will be someone. Detective Williams pulled out a small device that looked like a smartphone. This is a panic button. If you press and hold the red button for 3 seconds, it sends an immediate alert to every police officer within a 5-mile radius. They'll be at your location within minutes. What if minutes is too long? Then you use this. Judge Coleman reached into her purse and pulled out a small canister of pepper spray. It's legal for self-defense, and it will incapacitate an attacker long enough for help to arrive. I took both devices, feeling their weight in my hands. Weapons. At 73 years old, I was arming myself to fight a war against my own family. There's something else, Detective Williams said. We've been monitoring Melissa's phone calls and text messages. Yesterday, after she left your room, she called someone in Houston. A man named Vincent Torres. Who is he? He's a private investigator who specializes in what he calls family asset recovery. Basically, he helps people claim inheritances they feel they're entitled to. What did she tell him? She hired him to investigate your financial records. She wants to know about any trusts, hidden accounts, or recent changes to your will. My blood went cold. She's checking to see if I really signed those papers last week. Exactly. Which means she's going to find out about the trust soon. And when she does, she'll know that killing me won't get her the ranch. Which makes you even more dangerous to her, Judge Coleman said. A living witness who can expose her plans and ruin her financial scheme. I closed my eyes and tried to imagine what would happen when Melissa discovered that her carefully planned murder had been for nothing. That all her scheming and manipulation had gained her exactly $0. She's going to be furious, I said. Furious people make mistakes, Detective Williams said. And when she makes her mistake, we'll be ready. As they were leaving, Judge Coleman turned back to me one last time. Mrs. Williams, I want you to remember something. You're not just fighting for yourself anymore. You're fighting for every elderly person who's been targeted by people like Melissa. You're fighting for justice. After they left, I lay in that hospital bed thinking about the weight of what I was carrying. Not just my own justice, but justice for Robert Shen and James Mitchell and whoever else Melissa had destroyed in her climb toward wealth. The afternoon sun was streaming through my window when I heard familiar voices in the hallway again. David and Melissa, talking to the nurse about bringing a lawyer to see me. I fitted my recording device into my ear, picked up my panic button, and got ready for war. Would you trust a stranger to help you get justice against your own family? The morning of the lawyer meeting, I woke up before dawn with butterflies in my stomach like a teenager on her first date. Except instead of getting ready for romance, I was preparing to destroy my family. Marcus arrived at 6 a.m. with a briefcase full of equipment and a grim expression on his face. Mrs. Williams, are you absolutely sure you want to do this? We can still stop this whole thing and pursue other legal options. What other options? I asked, sitting up in my hospital bed. You said yourself that the recordings we have might not be enough for criminal charges. This is our best chance to get them to confess to actually drugging me and causing my fall. He opened his briefcase and pulled out several small devices. Okay. But I need you to understand exactly what we're doing here. This wire will record everything, not just their confessions, but anything you say too. If you threaten them, if you say anything that could be construed as extortion or blackmail, it could hurt our case. So I need to let them incriminate themselves without pushing too hard. Exactly. Let them think they're convincing you to sign papers. Let them brag about how smart they've been. But don't give them any reason to think you're setting them up. The recording device was smaller than the one I had been using, barely bigger than a hearing aid battery. Marcus showed me how to activate it by pressing it twice against my ear. The signal goes directly to Detective Williams, who will be monitoring from the parking garage. If anything goes wrong, she can be in this room within 60 seconds. What about the panic button? Keep it in your hand, under the bed sheets. If you feel threatened, press it. Don't worry about whether you're overreacting. We'd rather respond to a false alarm than arrive too late to help you. At 8:30, a man in an expensive suit knocked on my door. He was about 50 years old with slicked back hair and the kind of smile that car salesmen practice in mirrors. Mrs. Williams? I'm attorney Bradley Morrison. Your son and daughter-in-law asked me to help you with some estate planning documents. He didn't wait for permission to enter, just walked in and set his briefcase on the table beside my bed like he owned the place. Where are David and Melissa? I asked, making my voice sound weak and confused. They're getting coffee. They'll be right back. But I thought it might be good for us to talk privately first, just to make sure you understand what you're signing. Red flag number 1. Real lawyers don't usually meet with elderly clients alone, especially in hospital rooms, especially when those clients are on pain medication. What kind of documents? Oh, just some simple forms to make sure your assets are properly distributed when the time comes. Nothing complicated. He opened his briefcase and pulled out a stack of papers that looked like they had been printed that morning. No letterhead, no official stamps, no witness signature lines. Red flag number 2. Mr. Morrison, where is your law office? Downtown Dallas. We specialize in helping families during difficult transitions. What's the name of your firm? He hesitated for just a second, barely noticeable, but I caught it. Morrison and Associates. I was willing to bet there were no associates, and probably no legitimate law office either. That's when David and Melissa walked in, both carrying coffee cups and wearing expressions of fake concern. Good morning, Mama, David said, kissing my forehead. How are you feeling today? Tired, I said honestly. And confused about all these papers. Melissa moved to the other side of my bed. Oh, sweetie, don't worry about understanding every little detail. That's what lawyers are for. We just want to make sure everything is taken care of so you don't have to stress about it. Attorney Morrison spread the papers out where I could see them. These are very standard documents, Mrs. Williams. A new will, a power of attorney, and a transfer deed for your property in Oklahoma. A transfer deed. They weren't even waiting for me to die anymore. They wanted me to sign the ranch over to them immediately. Why do I need to sign a transfer deed? I asked, letting confusion creep into my voice. David and Melissa exchanged one of their looks. Well, Mama, David said carefully, the doctors aren't sure how long your recovery is going to take. And with your medical bills piling up, it might be easier if the ranch was in my name. That way, I can handle all the business decisions and take care of the finances. Take care of the finances. Right. But what if I get better? I asked. What if I want to go home? Of course you can go home, Melissa said quickly. The ranch will always be your home. We're just talking about paperwork, legal stuff. Nothing will actually change. Everything would change, and we all knew it. Once they had legal ownership, would be completely at their mercy. I don't know, I said, letting my voice tremble. This feels like such a big decision to make when I'm not feeling well. Attorney Morrison leaned forward. Mrs. Williams, I have to be honest with you. From a legal standpoint, it's much better to handle these things while you're still competent. If your condition worsens, if you become unable to make decisions, the court will have to get involved. That means lawyers, judges, months of proceedings. It's very stressful for families. The threat was clear: sign now while you can, or we'll have you declared incompetent and take everything anyway. David, I said, looking at my son with tears in my eyes, do you really think this is the right thing to do? He took my hand in both of his. Mama, I promise you, nothing bad will happen to you. Melissa and I will make sure you have everything you need. But this will give us the legal authority to protect your interests. Protect my interests by stealing everything I owned. Okay, I whispered. If you think it's best. As Attorney Morrison prepared the papers for my signature, I pressed the recording device twice against my ear and gripped the panic button under my sheets. Whatever happened next, I was ready. Have you ever had to betray someone you love to protect yourself? Attorney Morrison placed the first document in front of me. The power of attorney form that would give David and Melissa control over every aspect of my life. My hand shook as I picked up the pen, and for a moment, I wasn't sure if I was acting or if I really was terrified. Take your time, Mrs. Williams, the fake lawyer said. There's no rush. But there was a rush. I could see it in David's face, in the way he kept checking his watch. I could see it in Melissa's eyes, bright with anticipation. They wanted these papers signed before I changed my mind or got suspicious. David, I said, setting the pen down, I keep thinking about what happened to me. About my fall. I still can't remember anything about that night. He shifted uncomfortably in his chair. Mama, the doctors said memory loss is normal after a head injury. Don't torture yourself trying to remember. But I keep having these dreams. Or maybe they're memories, I can't tell. I dreamed that I was drinking tea that tasted funny. I dreamed that someone called me on the phone and told me to come outside. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Melissa's smile faltered for just a second, and David went very still. Dreams can be strange when you're on pain medication, Melissa said carefully. Maybe. But this dream felt so real. Someone called me and said there was an emergency. Said I needed to come outside right away. I watched their faces as I spoke. David looked sick. Melissa looked calculating, like she was trying to decide whether I was genuinely confused or testing them. What kind of emergency? She asked. Perfect. She was engaging with the story instead of dismissing it. I'm not sure. Something about David being hurt. Or maybe the ranch. I remember feeling scared and rushing outside without thinking about how dark it was. "Mama," David said, his voice strained, "I was never hurt. I was at home with Melissa that whole night." "You were?" I looked at him with wide, confused eyes. "But then who called me?" Another look passed between them. This one lasted longer, and I could see a whole conversation happening in their expressions. "Maybe nobody called you," Melissa said finally. "Maybe you were sleepwalking, like the doctor suggested." "But I never sleepwalk. Richard used to tease me because I slept like a rock every night for 30 years. "People can develop new habits when they're under stress," Attorney Morrison interjected. "Grief, medical issues, financial worries, they can all cause sleep disturbances." I turned to him with surprise. "How did you know I was under stress?" He realized his mistake immediately. A lawyer meeting a client for the first time shouldn't know anything about her personal circumstances beyond what was directly relevant to the legal documents. Your son mentioned that you'd been having some difficulties adjusting since your husband's death." "Nice save, but not good enough." "David, what difficulties have I been having?" My son looked like he wanted to disappear into his chair. "You know, Mama. You've been more forgetful lately. More confused about things." "Have I? I don't remember being confused about anything." The irony of that statement wasn't lost on any of us. "And you've been having trouble sleeping," Melissa added. "That's why we thought you might benefit from some herbal tea to help you relax." My blood turned to ice water. "Herbal tea?" "The chamomile tea I brought you last week. Remember? You said it tasted strange, but I told you that was just because it was a different brand than you usually buy." There it was. She had just admitted to giving me tea the night of my fall, tea that I had said tasted strange. "I don't remember you bringing me tea," I said honestly. "Well, that's another sign that your memory isn't what it used to be," she said with false sympathy. "That's why it's so important to get these legal matters settled while you're still able to make decisions." Attorney Morrison pushed the papers closer to me. "Mrs. Williams, I don't want to rush you, but I do have other clients to see today." "Of course," I said, picking up the pen again. "I just want to make sure I understand what I'm signing." I started reading the power of attorney document out loud, slowly and carefully. With each paragraph, David and Melissa grew more impatient. "This says you'll have control over my bank accounts," I said. "Just to pay your bills and handle necessary expenses," David assured me. "And my medical decisions. So we can make sure you get the best care possible," Melissa said. "And it says I can't revoke this power of attorney without going to court." "That's just to prevent confusion," Attorney Morrison said. "If your mental state deteriorates, you might try to revoke important protections that are actually helping you." I set the pen down again. This is a lot to think about. "Mama," David said, and I could hear desperation creeping into his voice, "you said you wanted to get this handled. You said you didn't want us to have to deal with lawyers and courts if something happened to you." "I know, but what if nothing happens to me? What if I get better and want to go home and manage my own affairs?" "Then we'll transfer everything back to you," Melissa said quickly. "This is just temporary, to help you through your recovery." She was lying, and we all knew it. Once they had power of attorney, they would never voluntarily give it up. "Melissa," I said, looking directly into her eyes, "can I ask you something personal?" "Of course." "Do you think I'm going to die?" The question caught her off guard. She opened her mouth, then closed it, clearly unsure how to answer. "I mean," I continued, "you seem very eager to get these papers signed. And you haven't visited me much since I've been in the hospital. It almost feels like you're preparing for my death rather than my recovery." "Rose, that's not true at all," she said, but her voice sounded hollow. "Then why the rush? Why can't we wait until I'm feeling stronger to make these decisions?" David leaned forward. "Because, Mama, and I hate to say this, but the doctors aren't sure you're going to get much stronger." "What do you mean?" "Your injuries were more serious than they first thought." The head trauma, the internal bleeding, they're concerned about long-term complications. This was news to me. My doctors had been optimistic about my recovery. What kind of complications? Cognitive decline, Melissa said softly. Memory loss. Difficulty making decisions. They think you should handle important legal matters now, while you still can. They were lying about my prognosis to pressure me into signing. Which meant they had probably talked to my doctors or somehow gotten access to my medical records. Have you spoken to my doctors about this? Of course we have, David said. We're your family. They've been keeping us informed about your condition. What did they tell you exactly? Another exchange of looks. They said that patients your age often don't fully recover from injuries like yours, Melissa said. They said we should be prepared for the possibility that you might need long-term care. Long-term care like what? Maybe a nursing home, David said quietly. Somewhere with medical staff who can watch you around the clock. A nursing home. They were planning to put me in a nursing home and take control of my ranch. Is that what you want? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. You want to put me in a home? Only if it's what's best for you, David said, but he couldn't meet my eyes. And you think signing these papers is what's best for me too? We think it's what's best for everyone, Melissa said. Everyone. Meaning them. I picked up the pen one more time and held it over the signature line. David and Melissa both leaned forward slightly, watching my every move. Before I sign this, I said, I want to hear you say it out loud. Say what? David asked. That you'll take good care of me. That you'll never put me somewhere I don't want to be. That you'll never take advantage of this power I'm giving you. Melissa reached over and squeezed my hand. Rose, I promise you, we will never do anything that isn't in your best interest. And David? What do you promise? My son took a deep breath. I promise, Mama, that everything we do will be to protect you and take care of you. I signa. As I was signing the will and the property transfer deed, I heard Melissa whisper to David, finally. I thought she was going to figure it out. My son's voice cracked as he confessed, Mama, we never meant for you to get hurt that bad. We just needed you to sleep longer. The pen froze in my hand. There it was, the confession I needed. Could you forgive your child for wanting you gone? Or would you fight back? The words hung in the air like poison gas. We just needed you to sleep longer. I set the pen down very carefully, my hand trembling, not from weakness this time, but from pure rage. What did you just say? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. David's face went white as he realized what he had just confessed. Mama, I didn't mean. You didn't mean what, David? You didn't mean to drug me? You didn't mean to cause my fall? Or you didn't mean to get caught? Attorney Morrison started gathering his papers. Perhaps I should give you folks some privacy to discuss family matters. Sit down, I said, my voice gaining strength. Nobody leaves this room until I get some answers. Melissa tried to salvage the situation. Rose, you're misunderstanding what David said. He's talking about the sleeping pills your doctor prescribed. We were worried you weren't getting enough rest. What sleeping pills? I don't take sleeping pills. The ones I mixed into your chamomile tea, she said, then immediately realized her second mistake of the morning. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it might burst out of my chest. You mixed sleeping pills into my tea? Just a small amount, David said desperately. We were worried about you. You seemed so agitated, so confused. We thought if you got a good night's sleep. You thought if you drugged me without my knowledge, what? I'd be easier to manipulate? Attorney Morrison was definitely trying to leave now, but I pressed my panic button under the sheets. Within 30 seconds, Detective Williams and 2 uniformed officers were at my door. Is everything all right in here? Detective Williams asked, her hand resting on her service weapon. Actually, no, I said, my voice gaining strength with every word. I'd like you to arrest these people for attempted murder. The room exploded into chaos. Mama, what are you talking about? David jumped up from his chair. You can't be serious, Melissa said, backing toward the window. Attorney Morrison tried to push past the officers. I don't know what's happening here, but I'm not involved in any. Sit down, all of you, Detective Williams commanded. Mrs. Williams, are you saying these people tried to kill you? I pulled the recording device from my ear and held it up. I'm saying they confessed to drugging me the night I fell. And I have it all on tape. The look of betrayal on David's face was almost enough to break my heart. Almost. You've been recording us? For 3 weeks, son. Every conversation, every plan, every detail of how you and your wife decided my life was worth less than your inheritance. Melissa's mask finally slipped completely. The fake concern, the false sympathy, the pretense of caring, it all disappeared, replaced by cold fury. You manipulative old witch, she hissed. You've been playing games with us this whole time. Games? I sat up straighter in my hospital bed, feeling stronger than I had in months. You call fighting for my life a game? Detective Williams stepped forward. Ma'am, I need you to remain calm. Everyone needs to remain calm while we sort this out. There's nothing to sort out, I said. David just confessed that they drugged me without my knowledge. Melissa admitted to putting sleeping pills in my tea. They caused my fall, and then they tried to convince me to sign documents giving them control of my ranch while I was vulnerable and medicated. Attorney Morrison finally found his voice. I had no knowledge of any criminal activity. I was hired to prepare legitimate estate planning documents. By whom? Detective Williams asked. Mrs. Rodriguez contacted me through my website. She said her mother-in-law wanted to update her will. Your website? I asked. What's the name of your law firm again? His face flushed red. I'm a freelance legal document preparer. I'm not technically a licensed attorney. So you're a fraud too, Detective Williams said. Perfect. She turned to David and Melissa. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. Wait, David said, panic in his voice. Detective, you don't understand. We weren't trying to hurt her. We were trying to help her. Help me? I couldn't keep the bitter laugh from escaping. By drugging me? By causing me to fall down concrete steps? By trying to steal my property? The ranch is falling apart, Mama. You can't take care of it anymore. We were trying to save it for the family. What family, David? The family that calls the hospital and says, call when it's over? The family that discusses my death like a stock transaction? That family? Melissa finally exploded. Yes, that family. Because you're a selfish old woman who's sitting on millions of dollars while your son struggles to pay his bills. That ranch should belong to David. He's worked that land his whole life. He's worked that land for wages, which I paid him. He's never owned it, never invested in it, never taken the risks that Richard and I took to build it into something valuable. And what happens when you die? She demanded. Where does all that value go? I smiled for the first time since this whole nightmare began. That's the beautiful part, Melissa. It doesn't go to you. Her face went slack. What do you mean? I mean that 3 days before my fall, I transferred the entire ranch into a trust. A trust that will use the proceeds to help elderly people who are being abused by their families. People like me. The silence in the room was deafening. David's voice came out as a croak. You gave it away? Every acre. Every dollar. Every penny you thought you were going to inherit. Melissa launched herself at my bed, but Detective Williams caught her before she could reach me. You cannot do that. That money belongs to David. That ranch belongs to our family. That ranch belonged to me and my husband, I said calmly. And we chose to give it to people who need help instead of people who would try to murder us for it. As Detective Williams handcuffed Melissa, my daughter-in-law turned to me with pure hatred in her eyes. This isn't over, Rose. Even from prison, I can make your life hell. From prison? I raised my eyebrows. Honey, you're going to have bigger problems than making my life hell. Detective Williams, tell her about Vincent Torres. Detective Williams smiled grimly. Vincent Torres, the private investigator you hired to look into Mrs. Williams' finances? He's actually an undercover police officer. Every conversation you had with him about recovering family assets has been recorded and will be used as evidence of conspiracy to commit fraud. The color drained from Melissa's face. And that's not all, Detective Williams continued. We've been investigating your previous marriages. Turns out, Robert Chen's family never believed his death was accidental. They're reopening that case based on the evidence we've gathered about your pattern of targeting older men with money. I want a lawyer, Melissa whispered. You're going to need a good one, I said. Because I'm not just pressing charges for what you did to me. I'm making sure the families of your other victims know exactly who you are and what you've done. As they led David and Melissa away in handcuffs, my son turned back to me one last time. Mama, he said, tears streaming down his face, I'm sorry. I never wanted you to get hurt. I know, baby, I said, and despite everything, I meant it. But wanting something and making sure it doesn't happen are two different things. You made your choice. The room fell quiet after they left, except for the beeping of my monitors and the distant sound of traffic from the street below. Marcus appeared in the doorway, grinning from ear to ear. Mrs. Williams, that was the most incredible thing I've ever witnessed. You just took down a serial killer and her accomplices while recovering from injuries they caused. I took down the people who tried to steal my life, I corrected. Everything else is just details. Detective Williams came back a few minutes later with a thick folder. Mrs. Williams, I wanted you to know, we found security camera footage from your neighbor's house. We can see Melissa's car in your driveway the night you fell. We can see her leaving your house around 10:15 p.m. 15 minutes after Mrs. Patterson heard me scream. Exactly. Which means she was there when you fell. She could have called for help immediately, but she didn't. She let you lie there unconscious for 20 minutes before your neighbor found you. The cold calculation of it took my breath away. Not only had she drugged me and caused my fall, but she had stood there and watched me lying broken on those concrete steps, hoping I would die before anyone found me. How long do you think they'll get? With your testimony, the recordings, the physical evidence, and the connection to her previous victims? David will probably get 10 to 15 years. Melissa, she's looking at life without parole. I closed my eyes and tried to feel something other than satisfaction. I tried to find some sadness for the family I was about to lose, some regret for the choices that had led us all to this moment. But all I felt was relief. For the first time in 3 years, I was safe. If you had video proof of someone trying to kill you, would you press charges against family? 3 days after David and Melissa's arrest, my hospital room looked like a flower shop exploded. Bouquets covered every available surface, roses from my neighbors, daisies from my church, and a massive arrangement of sunflowers from the ranch hands who had worked for Richard and me for decades. But the most meaningful visitor wasn't carrying flowers. Jake Patterson had been our ranch foreman for 28 years. He was 65 now, with hands like leather and eyes that had seen every kind of weather Oklahoma could throw at a man. When he walked into my room wearing his best Sunday shirt and holding his hat in his hands, I almost cried. Miss Rose, he said in his soft drawl, I came as soon as I heard what those people did to you. Jake, you didn't have to drive all the way to Dallas. Yes, ma'am, I did. And I brought some things you need to see. He pulled a manila envelope from inside his jacket and handed it to me. Mr. Richard left this with me before he died. He said if anything ever happened to you, if anyone ever tried to hurt you or take advantage of you, I should give you this. My hands shook as I opened the envelope. Inside was a letter in Richard's handwriting and a bank statement showing an account I had never heard of. The letter was dated 6 months before Richard's death. My dearest Rose. If you're reading this, it means someone has tried to hurt you, and Jake has done what I asked him to do. I hope I'm wrong about needing this insurance policy, but my gut tells me there are people who will see your kindness as weakness and try to take advantage when I'm not here to protect you. The account statement shows money I set aside specifically for you, money that nobody else knows about, not even our lawyer. It's enough to make sure you never have to depend on anyone else for anything. It's enough to fight back if someone tries to take what's ours. But more than that, baby, it's proof that I knew you were strong enough to survive whatever came after I was gone. You're the strongest woman I ever met, and I fell in love with that strength the first day I saw you standing up to those men who said we didn't belong together. Use this money to protect yourself. Use it to fight. Use it to show the world what happens when someone underestimates Rose Williams. I love you more than all the stars in the Oklahoma sky. Your devoted husband, Richard. I looked at the bank statement through tears that made the numbers blur. $800,000. Money that Richard had somehow saved without my knowledge, hidden away for exactly this kind of emergency. Jake, I whispered, how long have you known about this? Since the day Mr. Richard set it up. He made me promise not to tell you unless someone tried to hurt you. He said you were too generous, that you'd probably give it away to help other folks before you used it to protect yourself. He was right. I would have. There's something else, Jake continued. The boys and I have been talking. What boys? The ranch hands. Tommy, Pete, Carlos, Mike, all of us who've been working your land for years. We heard about what David and Melissa tried to do, and we want you to know something. He looked uncomfortable, like he was about to say something that went against his nature. We never liked her, Miss Rose. From the day David brought her around, we could tell she was trouble. The way she looked at the land, the way she talked about the ranch like it was already hers. We should have said something. Jake, that wasn't your place. Maybe not. But protecting you was our place, and we failed. We let you down when you needed us most. You didn't let me down. You're here now. Yes, ma'am, we are. And we want you to know that we'll do whatever it takes to help you fight this thing. If you need witnesses, if you need people to testify about what kind of person Melissa really was, we're ready. The idea of these tough, weathered men rallying around me like an army of protectors made my heart swell. What did you see? What can you testify to? Jake pulled out a small notebook, the kind ranchers use to keep track of cattle and feed schedules. I wrote it all down after David got arrested. Every strange thing she did, every conversation that didn't sit right. He opened the notebook and started reading. October 15th, Melissa asked me detailed questions about how much the ranch is worth. November 3rd, she wanted to know which pastures had oil rights and whether we'd ever had the land surveyed for mineral deposits. November 20th. She asked if there were any liens or debts against the property. She was doing research. Yes, ma'am. Like she was planning to sell the place the minute she got her hands on it. But here's the thing that really bothered me. December 2nd, she asked me if any of the ranch hands had keys to your house. My blood went cold. She wanted to know if anyone could get inside without me knowing. That's what I figured. I told her no, that only family had keys. But it made me nervous enough that I started keeping a closer eye on your place. You were watching my house? Not watching exactly. But driving by more often during my evening rounds. Making sure your lights were on, making sure your truck was in the driveway where it should be. Jake flipped to another page in his notebook. December 18th, that was the night before your accident. I drove by around 9:30, and Melissa's car was parked behind your house where you couldn't see it from the front windows. You saw her car? Yes, ma'am. White BMW with Houston plates. I thought maybe she and David were visiting, but David's truck wasn't there. Just her car, hidden back there like she didn't want anyone to know she was there. Evidence. Jake had seen Melissa at my house the night I fell, and he had written it down in his notebook. Jake, this is incredible. Did you tell the police? Not yet. I wanted to talk to you first, make sure it was okay. I don't like getting involved with law enforcement, but for you, Miss Rose, I'll talk to whoever needs to hear it. I thought about Detective Williams and how excited she would be to hear about Jake's observations. Physical evidence placing Melissa at the scene, documented in writing, witnessed by a man whose honesty was beyond question. There's one more thing, Jake said. The boys and I were talking, and we want to make you an offer. What kind of offer? We know you put the ranch in that trust to help other folks. That's a good thing, and Mr. Richard would be proud. But we also know you're going to need a place to live when you get out of this hospital. He paused, turning his hat in his hands. The foreman's house has been empty since my wife passed. It's small, but it's got everything you need, and it's right there on the land you love. We'd like you to move in there, let us take care of you the way you and Mr. Richard took care of us all these years. The offer took my breath away. These men who had worked for me were offering to become my family, to give me a place to belong when my real family had betrayed me. Jake, that's the kindest thing anyone has ever offered me. Is that a yes? I thought about going back to my house with its steep front steps and memories of that terrible night. I thought about living alone, always wondering if someone was watching me, always afraid of the next cup of tea or the next knock on the door. Then I thought about the foreman's house with its wide front porch and views of the pastures Richard and I had loved. I thought about Jake and the other ranch hands checking on me, including me in their daily routines, treating me like the valuable person I had forgotten I was. Yes, I said, smiling through my tears. That's a yes. Old Jake from the ranch said something that changed everything. Miss Rose, your husband left something for you. Something she don't know about. Who would you call if you needed to fight the battle of your life? That evening, alone in my hospital room with Richard's letter in my hands, I felt him with me more strongly than I had since the day he died. The letter smelled like his cologne, Old Spice and leather and the Oklahoma wind that he carried with him everywhere. I read his words again, focusing on the part that made my heart race. You're the strongest woman I ever met, and I fell in love with that strength the first day I saw you. I remembered that day. July 15, 1969. I was 19 years old, working at Murphy's Diner in Tulsa, saving money for nursing school. Richard was 25, a white farmer's son who had just inherited land from his grandfather and was trying to figure out how to make it profitable. He came into the diner every Tuesday for 3 months, always ordering coffee and pie, always leaving a $1 tip that was bigger than his meal. The other waitresses thought he was just another lonely farmer looking for conversation, but I could tell he was different. He looked at me like I was a person worth knowing, not just a pretty face serving coffee. The day he asked me out, 3 men from town cornered him in the parking lot. Boy, the biggest one said, you need to understand something about the natural order of things around here. I was watching through the window, my heart pounding, waiting for Richard to back down like most white men did when confronted about crossing racial lines. Instead, Richard stepped closer to the man. The only thing I need to understand, he said in that calm, steady voice I would learn to love, is that the most beautiful, intelligent woman in this town has agreed to have dinner with me. And if you have a problem with that, you're welcome to take it up with me directly. The man swung at Richard. Richard ducked, grabbed the man's arm, and used his own momentum to send him face first into the dirt. Anyone else want to discuss the natural order? Richard asked, looking at the other 2 men. They helped their friend up and left without another word. That was the moment I fell in love with him. Not because he defended me, but because he did it without hesitation, without calculating the cost to himself. Now, 30 years after his death, he was still protecting me. The next morning, Marcus arrived with news that made Richard's gift even more meaningful. Mrs. Williams, I've been working with Detective Williams to track down Melissa's financial records. What we found is going to shock you. He opened his briefcase and pulled out bank statements, credit reports, and legal documents. Over the past 3 years, Melissa has been systematically draining David's bank accounts. She convinced him to take out loans against his future inheritance from you, loans totaling over $400,000. My heart sank. $400,000? Where did that money go? Shopping, mostly. Designer clothes, jewelry, expensive vacations. But also payments to Vincent Torres, the fake private investigator. She was paying him to research your finances and help her figure out the best way to claim your assets. So David is broke. Worse than broke. He's deeply in debt, and now that Melissa's been arrested, the creditors are coming after him for the full amount. I thought about my son, sitting in a jail cell, facing not just criminal charges but financial ruin. Despite everything he had done, despite his willingness to let his wife kill me, he was still my baby boy. Marcus, can Richard's money help David with his debts? Marcus looked at me like I had lost my mind. Mrs. Williams, this man tried to kill you for money. Why would you want to help him? Because he's my son. And because Melissa manipulated him just like she manipulated her other husbands. David isn't a killer, he's a weak man who fell under the influence of a killer. The district attorney might see it differently. What if David cooperated with the prosecution? What if he testified against Melissa about everything she planned and everything she did? Marcus was quiet for a long moment, considering the implications. It's possible. If David's testimony helps convict Melissa for multiple murders, the DA might be willing to make a deal. Reduced charges in exchange for cooperation. And then I could help him with his debts. Mrs. Williams, are you sure about this? After what he did? I thought about the little boy who used to crawl into bed with Richard and me during thunderstorms. I thought about teaching him to ride horses and watching him graduate high school and walking him down the aisle at his first wedding. Then I thought about Richard's letter, and his words about strength. Sometimes strength meant fighting back. But sometimes it meant choosing mercy when justice would be easier. I'm sure. Set up a meeting with David. I want to talk to him. The meeting took place 3 days later in a conference room at the county jail. David walked in wearing an orange jumpsuit and handcuffs, looking like he had aged 10 years in a week. When he saw me, he started crying before he even sat down. Mama, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. I know, baby. I never wanted you to get hurt. I never wanted any of this to happen. But you let it happen, David. You stood by and watched while Melissa planned my death. He hung his head in shame. She said you were suffering. She said the cancer was going to kill you anyway, and this way would be easier. She made it sound like we were being merciful. I don't have cancer, David. He looked up at me in shock. What? I don't have cancer. I never had cancer. Where did you get that idea? Melissa said, she said she talked to your doctor. She said you were dying and didn't want to tell anyone because you didn't want to be a burden. Another lie. Melissa had convinced David that I was terminally ill to make him feel like killing me was a kindness. David, I want you to listen to me very carefully. I'm 73 years old, and except for some arthritis and the injuries from my fall, I'm in excellent health. My doctor expects me to live another 10 to 15 years. The revelation hit him like a physical blow. She lied to me. About everything. The cancer, my finances, my mental state, all lies designed to make you feel like you were doing the right thing. Oh God, Mama. What have I done? You've made some terrible choices. But you can still make better ones. Marcus leaned forward. David, the district attorney is willing to make you an offer. If you testify against Melissa, if you help them build a case against her for the murders of her previous husbands, they'll reduce your charges to elder abuse and conspiracy. You'd probably serve 3 to 5 years instead of 15 to 20. And if I don't? Then you go down with her for attempted murder. David was quiet for a long time, staring at his handcuffed hands. What would I have to do? Tell the truth, I said. About everything. Every conversation, every plan, every detail of what she told you and what she asked you to do. She'll hate me. She already hates you, son. The question is whether you want to spend the rest of your life in prison for a woman who used you, or whether you want a chance to rebuild your life and maybe earn your way back into your mother's good graces. He looked at me with hope in his eyes for the first time since his arrest. "You'd forgive me?" "I'd consider it. If you prove to me that you're genuinely sorry and willing to make amends." "How do I make amends for trying to kill my own mother?" I pulled out Richard's bank statement and slid it across the table. "Your father left me some money that nobody knew about. Enough to pay off your debts and give you a fresh start when you get out of prison." David stared at the numbers on the page, his mouth hanging open. "He left you $800,000? He left me the means to protect myself and help the people I love, even when they don't deserve it." David broke down completely then, sobbing like the little boy who used to run to me when he was hurt or scared. "I don't deserve this, Mama. I don't deserve your help or your forgiveness." "No," I agreed. "You don't. But I'm giving it to you anyway, because that's what mothers do. We love our children even when they break our hearts." Marcus handed David a tissue and a legal document. "This is a cooperation agreement with the district attorney's office. If you sign it, you're committed to telling the truth about everything Melissa did and said. No lies, no protecting her, no holding back details because you think they might hurt her case." David wiped his eyes and looked at the document. "If I do this, if I testify against her, what happens to Melissa? If your testimony helps convict her for multiple murders, she'll probably get life in prison without the possibility of parole." "Good," David said, his voice hardening. "She destroyed my life. She almost killed my mother. She deserves whatever she gets." He signed the agreement. As the guards were taking him back to his cell, David turned to me one last time. "Mama, do you think Daddy would be proud of what you did? Standing up to us, fighting back the way you did?" I thought about Richard's letter, about his words about strength and love and protection. "I think your daddy would be proud that I finally learned to be as strong as he always believed I was." That night, I held Richard's letter against my heart and whispered a prayer of gratitude for a man who was still taking care of me 4 years after his death. Richard's letter ended with words that made me weep. "Baby, if you're reading this, they tried to take you from me. Make them pay. Have you ever received a message from someone after they died that changed your life?" 2 weeks later, I was finally discharged from the hospital and moved into the foreman's house on the ranch. Jake had cleaned it from top to bottom, and the other ranch hands had filled it with furniture, groceries, and fresh flowers. For the first time in months, I felt like I was home. But the legal battle was just beginning. Patricia Coleman, the retired judge who had been helping with my case, arrived at my new home on a Tuesday morning with a briefcase full of documents and a smile that meant business. "Mrs. Williams, I have some news that's going to make your day. The district attorney has decided to pursue murder charges against Melissa for the deaths of Robert Chen and James Mitchell." I set down my coffee cup carefully. "They found enough evidence?" "Your son's testimony, combined with the financial records and the pattern of behavior we documented, was enough to convince the DA that those deaths weren't accidents. Robert Chen's family is overjoyed. They've been fighting for 25 years to get his case reopened." "What about James Mitchell's family?" "His brother flew in from California yesterday. He said he never believed James would go swimming alone at night. James was terrified of water and couldn't swim more than a few strokes." Judge Coleman opened her briefcase and pulled out a thick file. "But that's not all. The FBI has taken over the investigation. Melissa's pattern of targeting and killing wealthy men across multiple states makes this a federal case. They're calling her the Black Widow Killer." The name sent chills down my spine. My daughter-in-law wasn't just a greedy woman who had made bad choices, she was a serial killer who had been operating for decades. How many victims do they think there are? At least 5, possibly more. They're reviewing suspicious deaths of older men across Texas, Oklahoma, Louisiana, and Arkansas going back 30 years. I thought about all those families who had lost fathers, husbands, sons to Melissa's greed. All those people who had grieved what they thought were tragic accidents, never knowing their loved ones had been murdered. What does this mean for David? Good news. Since he's cooperating with the federal investigation, his charges have been reduced to conspiracy and elder abuse. He'll probably serve 2 to 3 years and be eligible for parole in 18 months. And Melissa? Judge Coleman's smile turned cold. If they can prove even half of what they suspect, she's looking at multiple life sentences without the possibility of parole. That afternoon, Marcus arrived with more news. The fake lawyer who had tried to trick me into signing fraudulent documents was actually wanted in 6 states for elderly financial exploitation. Bradley Morrison isn't even his real name, Marcus said, settling into the chair across from me on the front porch. His real name is William Brady, and he's been running this scam for 15 years. He targets elderly people in hospitals and nursing homes, convinces them to sign documents that give their families power of attorney, then takes a cut of whatever assets get stolen. How did Melissa find him? Through an online forum for people planning to exploit elderly relatives. Yes, that's a real thing, and yes, it's as horrible as it sounds. The idea that there were websites and forums dedicated to helping people steal from their aging parents made my stomach turn. Marcus, I want to do something about this. I want to use Richard's money to help other people who are being targeted the same way I was. What did you have in mind? A legal defense fund. Money to help elderly people hire lawyers when their families try to take advantage of them. Money to help families like Robert Chen's reopen suspicious death cases. Marcus pulled out his laptop and started making notes. That's a beautiful idea, Mrs. Williams. We could set it up as a non-profit organization. The Rose Williams Elder Defense Fund. Not the Rose Williams Fund. The Richard Williams Fund. He's the one who made this possible. Even better. We could provide free legal services, investigative support, and emergency financial assistance to elderly people facing family exploitation. As Marcus and I discussed the details of the fund, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years: purpose. Instead of just surviving, I was going to help other people survive. Instead of being a victim, I was going to prevent other people from becoming victims. That evening, Detective Williams called with an update on the investigation. Mrs. Williams, I wanted you to know, we executed a search warrant on Melissa's house in Houston. What we found there is going to interest you. What kind of things? A file cabinet full of research on wealthy elderly people across the Southwest. Names, addresses, financial information, family relationships. She had been planning her next targets. My blood went cold. How many people? 47. All of them over 70, all of them with significant assets, all of them with adult children who might be susceptible to manipulation. She was going to do this to 47 more people? If we hadn't stopped her, yes. Mrs. Williams, you didn't just save your own life. You saved dozens of other lives. After Detective Williams hung up, I sat on my front porch watching the sunset over the pastures that Richard and I had loved together. The same land that Melissa had tried to steal, the same home she had tried to take from me. But I was still here. Still alive, still fighting, still strong. Jake walked up from the barn, carrying a thermos of coffee and wearing the satisfied smile of a man who had finished a good day's work. Miss Rose, I wanted you to know, we got a call today from a reporter with the Dallas Morning News. She wants to do a story about what you did, about how you caught that woman who was killing people. What did you tell her? I told her she'd have to ask you herself. But I think you should consider it. Your story could help other folks recognize when someone's trying to take advantage of them. I thought about those 47 names in Melissa's files. 47 people who were walking around right now, having no idea they had been targeted by a serial killer. Set up the interview, Jake. If my story can save even one of those people, it's worth telling. As the stars came out over the Oklahoma sky, I felt Richard's presence with me again. Not the ghost of grief and loss, but the warm memory of a partnership that had been strong enough to protect me even after death. We did it, baby, I whispered to the wind. We won. The attorney smiled as she reviewed the evidence. Mrs. Rose, by the time we're done, they'll be lucky to avoid life sentences. Is justice enough to heal betrayal, or does the wound never close? 6 months later, I sat in the front row of a federal courthouse in Dallas, watching as Melissa Rodriguez was led into the courtroom in shackles. She had lost weight in prison, and her perfectly styled blonde hair had grown out to show gray roots. But her eyes were the same, cold, calculating, and filled with hatred when they found mine across the room. The trial had been front-page news for weeks. Black widow killer faces justice, grandmother's courage exposes serial killer, the woman who refused to die quietly. David had been released on parole 2 weeks earlier and was sitting in the back of the courtroom. We had spoken several times since his release, carefully rebuilding a relationship that had been shattered by betrayal. He was attending counseling, working on Jake's crew at the ranch, and slowly earning back my trust. But today wasn't about forgiveness. Today was about justice. The prosecutor, a sharp woman named Elena Vasquez, stood to address the jury with the kind of confidence that comes from having an airtight case. Ladies and gentlemen, over the next week, you're going to hear a story that will shock you. A story about a woman who made murder her profession, who targeted vulnerable men for their wealth, and who almost succeeded in claiming her 5th victim. Melissa's defense attorney, a tired-looking man who had clearly taken this case because someone had to, tried to object, but Judge Harrison overruled him. The evidence will show, Prosecutor Vasquez continued, that Melissa Rodriguez systematically researched, stalked, and murdered at least 4 men over the past 25 years. And when those murders weren't enough to satisfy her greed, she set her sights on Rose Williams, a 73-year-old grandmother whose only crime was owning land that the defendant wanted to inherit. I watched the jurors' faces as they listened to the prosecutor outline the case. 12 ordinary people, teachers, mechanics, store clerks, retirees, who would decide whether justice would finally be served for Robert Chin, James Mitchell, and all of Melissa's other victims. The first witness was David. He walked to the witness stand wearing a simple blue suit, his hands shaking slightly as he was sworn in. When he looked at Melissa, I saw something I had never seen before, genuine disgust. Mr. Williams, Prosecutor Vasquez began, how did you meet the defendant? At a grief support group in Oklahoma City. I had lost my first wife in a car accident, and I was lost. Melissa seemed to understand what I was going through. How long did you date before getting married? 6 months. She said she didn't want to waste time when we had found true love. I remembered how rushed that courtship had seemed. How Melissa had pushed for a quick wedding, a quick move to the ranch, quick access to our family's financial information. Did the defendant ever discuss your mother's health? David's voice cracked slightly. She was obsessed with it. Always asking about my mother's medical appointments, her medications, whether she had updated her will recently. Did she ever suggest that your mother was suffering? Constantly. She said it was cruel to let an old woman live in pain, that sometimes the kindest thing was to help someone, let go. The prosecutor walked David through every conversation, every plan, every detail of Melissa's manipulation. How she had convinced him that I was dying of cancer. How she had suggested that drugging my tea would be merciful. How she had assured him that no one would ever suspect anything because old people fall down all the time. When the defense attorney cross-examined David, he tried to paint him as the real mastermind, suggesting that he had manipulated Melissa into helping him kill me for money. Mr. Williams, isn't it true that you were desperate for money to pay off gambling debts? I didn't have gambling debts. But you did have significant financial problems, correct? Because Melissa was spending money we didn't have. She ran up credit cards, took out loans, convinced me that we needed to live a certain lifestyle to impress potential business partners. So you're saying this was all her idea? David looked directly at Melissa for the first time since taking the witness stand. Every bit of it. Every plan, every detail, every lie. She told me my mother was dying, and I believed her because I wanted to believe that what we were doing was mercy instead of murder. The next witness was Dr. Patricia Hendricks, the emergency room physician who had treated me the night of my fall. Doctor, what was Mrs. Williams' condition when she arrived at your hospital? She had suffered significant trauma consistent with a fall from height onto a hard surface. Broken ribs, fractured jaw, severe bruising, and a concussion. Were these injuries life-threatening? They could have been, especially for a woman her age. If she had remained unconscious much longer, or if the internal bleeding had been more severe, she might not have survived. Doctor, did you test Mrs. Williams' blood for foreign substances? We did. We found high levels of zolpidem, a prescription sleep medication, in her system. Was Mrs. Williams prescribed this medication? No. According to her medical records, she had never been prescribed sleep aids of any kind. The prosecutor moved to her evidence table and picked up a small plastic bag. Doctor, I'm showing you what's been marked as State's Exhibit 15. Can you identify this? This is a tea bag that was recovered from Mrs. Williams' kitchen the day after her fall. Testing showed it contained residual traces of zolpidem that had been mixed into the tea leaves. I watched the jury absorb this information. Physical evidence. Proof that Melissa had drugged me just as she had confessed to doing. The most devastating testimony came from FBI agent Sarah Martinez, who had investigated Melissa's previous victims. Agent Martinez, what similarities did you find between Mrs. Williams' case and the deaths of Robert Chen and James Mitchell? In all three cases, the defendant married men who were significantly older and had substantial assets. In all three cases, she researched their financial holdings extensively before marriage. In all three cases, she isolated them from friends and family members who might have been protective. What about the actual murders? In Robert Chen's case, he died from what appeared to be an accidental drug overdose, but we found evidence that someone had increased the dosage of his heart medication. In James Mitchell's case, he allegedly drowned during a nighttime swim, but witnesses reported seeing the defendant near the lake that evening, and Mitchell's friends testified that he was afraid of water. And in Mrs. Williams' case? The defendant attempted to make the murder look like an accidental fall by an elderly woman with balance problems. If Mrs. Williams had died from her injuries, it's likely the death would have been ruled accidental, just like the others. Agent Martinez pulled out a thick file. We also found evidence that the defendant had researched 47 additional potential victims across 5 states. All elderly, all wealthy, all with adult children who might be susceptible to manipulation. The courtroom fell silent as the implications sank in. Melissa hadn't just been a woman who had made terrible choices, she had been planning a killing spree that could have lasted for years. When it came time for Melissa to testify in her own defense, she surprised everyone by taking the stand. Her attorney had clearly advised against it, but Melissa's ego wouldn't let her remain silent. She was a skillful liar, I had to give her that. She painted herself as a victim of manipulation, claiming that David had threatened her, that she had been afraid for her life, that everything she had done was under duress. But when Prosecutor Vasquez cross-examined her, the mask finally slipped. Ms. Rodriguez, you testified that you were afraid of David Williams. Is that why you researched 47 other potential victims? I don't know what you're talking about. You don't remember the files we found in your Houston home? The detailed financial records of elderly men across 5 states? Melissa's face flushed red. That was just research. For a book I was thinking about writing. A book about what? About how families exploit elderly relatives. So you were writing a book about elder abuse while simultaneously abusing an elderly relative yourself? I never abused anyone. You drugged a 73-year-old woman without her knowledge, causing her to fall down concrete steps and suffer life-threatening injuries. What would you call that? That was David's idea. But you admitted on tape that you were the one who put sleeping pills in her tea. That was taken out of context. Prosecutor Vasquez played the recording of Melissa's confession. Her own voice, clear and unmistakable, admitting to drugging my tea. Does this sound out of context to you, Ms. Rodriguez? Melissa's composure finally cracked completely. She had it coming, she screamed. That selfish old woman was sitting on millions of dollars while her son struggled to pay his bills. She deserved what happened to her. The courtroom erupted. Judge Harrison banged his gavel for order, but the damage was done. Melissa had just confessed to attempted murder in front of a jury, and her words had been captured on the court reporter's transcript. As they led my son away in handcuffs, he turned and said the words that broke my heart, "Mama, we did this because we love you." Could love and murder exist in the same heart? What do you think? The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours. When they returned to the courtroom, the foreman, a grandmother herself, looked directly at Melissa as she read the verdicts. On the charge of conspiracy to commit murder in the first degree, we find the defendant guilty. On the charge of attempted murder in the first degree, we find the defendant guilty. On the charge of elder abuse, we find the defendant guilty. On the charge of murder in the first degree in the death of Robert Shin, we find the defendant guilty. On the charge of murder in the first degree in the death of James Mitchell, we find the defendant guilty. 5 guilty verdicts. 5 chances for Melissa to spend the rest of her life in prison. As the verdicts were read, I watched Melissa's face. She showed no remorse, no sadness, no recognition that she had destroyed multiple families with her greed. She just looked angry that she had been caught. Judge Harrison scheduled sentencing for the following week, but everyone in that courtroom knew what the outcome would be. 5 life sentences without the possibility of parole. The media frenzy outside the courthouse was overwhelming. Reporters shouted questions, cameras flashed, and microphones were thrust in my face as Jake and Marcus escorted me to the car. Mrs. Williams, how do you feel about the verdicts? Mrs. Williams, what would you say to other elderly people who might be facing similar situations? Mrs. Williams, do you forgive your son? I stopped walking and turned to face the crowd of reporters. Marcus tried to pull me toward the car, but I needed to say something. I want you to know that what happened to me happens to elderly people every day across this country. Family members who see inheritance money as more important than human life. Predators like Melissa Rodriguez who target vulnerable people for their wealth. The questions stopped. Everyone leaned in to hear what I had to say. But I also want you to know that we don't have to be victims. We can fight back. We can be strong. We can refuse to go quietly into the night when someone tries to take our lives or our dignity. What advice would you give to other elderly people in similar situations? Trust your instincts. If someone is pressuring you to sign papers or make financial decisions quickly, take time to think about it. Talk to someone you trust outside your family. And remember, you have value as a human being that has nothing to do with your bank account. That afternoon, I returned to the ranch feeling lighter than I had in months. Justice had been served. The woman who had tried to kill me would never hurt anyone again. David was waiting for me on the front porch of the foreman's house, holding a bouquet of yellow roses and looking more nervous than I had seen him since he was a teenager asking to borrow the truck for a date. Mama, I wanted to thank you. For what? For not giving up on me. For helping me see what Melissa really was. For giving me a chance to make things right. We sat together on the porch swing that Jake had installed, looking out over the pastures where David had played as a child. Son, I need you to understand something. I forgive you, but forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting. You made choices that almost cost me my life. I know. And if you ever put anyone else in danger because you're too weak to stand up to someone who's manipulating you, we're done. Forever. He nodded solemnly. I understand. And Mama? I'm in therapy now. Real therapy, with a real doctor who's helping me understand how I let myself get so lost. Good. Because I need to know that the man I'm rebuilding a relationship with is strong enough to protect the people he loves, not endanger them. The next week, we returned to the courthouse for Melissa's sentencing. Judge Harrison was thorough and merciless. Ms. Rodriguez, in my 30 years on the bench, I have never seen a more calculated, cold-blooded pattern of behavior. You didn't kill for passion or revenge or even desperation. You killed for money, pure and simple. Melissa stood ramrod straight, still showing no emotion. The evidence shows that you targeted vulnerable men, manipulated their emotions, and murdered them for their assets. You destroyed families, left children without fathers, and caused immeasurable pain to people who trusted you. Judge Harrison paused, looking directly at Melissa. Your attempt to murder Rose Williams was particularly heinous because it involved not just premeditation, but the corruption of her own son. You turned a family against itself for your own financial gain. On each count of murder in the first degree, I sentence you to life in prison without the possibility of parole, sentences to run consecutively, not concurrently. 5 life sentences. Melissa would die in prison. As the bailiff led her away, Melissa turned to look at me one last time. Instead of hatred, I saw something that might have been fear. For the first time since I had met her, Melissa Rodriguez looked like what she really was, a pathetic criminal who had finally been caught. That evening, the phone at my house rang constantly. Reporters wanting follow-up interviews, elderly people calling to share their own stories of family betrayal, law enforcement agencies asking for my help with similar cases. But the call that mattered most came from Robert Chen's daughter in California. Mrs. Williams, my name is Linda Chen. My father was Robert Chen, one of Melissa's victims. I'm so sorry for your loss. Thank you. But I'm calling to thank you. My family has been fighting for 25 years to prove that our father was murdered. Because of your courage, because you refused to be a victim, we finally have justice for our dad. I thought about Robert Chen, dying alone and confused, probably never understanding that the woman he trusted was killing him. Linda, your father helped save my life. If the FBI hadn't found the pattern connecting his death to mine, Melissa might never have been caught. Mrs. Williams, would you consider speaking at a memorial service for my father? He would have admired your strength. I thought about Richard and what he would have wanted me to do. I thought about the 47 names in Melissa's files, people who were alive today because justice had been served. I'd be honored. The judge's gavel fell, 25 years to life. Justice was served, but could my heart ever heal? Is justice enough to heal betrayal, or does the wound never close? 1 year later, I stood in the kitchen of the foreman's house, making cornbread for Sunday dinner. Through the window, I could see David working with Jake to repair a section of fence that had been damaged in the last storm. He moved differently now, with purpose instead of aimlessness, with confidence instead of the desperate need for approval that had made him so susceptible to Melissa's manipulation. The Richard Williams Elder Defense Fund had helped 83 elderly people in its first year of operation. We had provided legal representation, investigative services, and emergency financial assistance to grandparents whose families were trying to exploit them. We had helped reopen 4 suspicious death cases and prevented countless financial scams. But the work that meant the most to me was the speaking I had been doing at senior centers, churches, and community organizations across the Southwest. Every week, I told my story to groups of elderly people, teaching them to recognize the warning signs of family exploitation and giving them the tools to fight back. Remember, I would tell them, your value as a human being doesn't depend on your bank account. You don't owe anyone your dignity, your safety, or your life just because they're family. After every speech, people would come up to me with their own stories. Women whose children were pressuring them to sign power of attorney documents. Men whose new spouses were isolating them from longtime friends. Families torn apart by greed and manipulation. But they also came with stories of hope. Stories of standing up to abusive relatives. Stories of finding the strength to fight back. Stories of discovering that they were worth more than the people who tried to exploit them had ever acknowledged. This particular Sunday, as I was setting the table for dinner, I heard a car in the driveway. Through the window, I saw a familiar figure getting out of a blue sedan, Detective Williams, carrying a bouquet of flowers and wearing civilian clothes. Detective Williams. I called from the porch. What brings you out to the ranch? Sarah, she corrected with a smile. I'm not on duty today. I brought you something I thought you'd want to see. She handed me a newspaper, the Dallas Morning News, folded to show an article on the front page. The headline read, Black Widow Killer Found Dead in Prison Cell. I read the first few paragraphs carefully. Melissa Rodriguez had been found dead in her prison cell 3 days earlier. The official cause of death was listed as suicide, but the article mentioned that she had been receiving death threats from other inmates whose own elderly relatives had been victimized by similar schemes. How do you feel about this? Sarah asked gently. I thought about it for a moment, searching my heart for any satisfaction or relief at the news of Melissa's death. Instead, I felt something unexpected, sadness. Not sadness for Melissa, but sadness for all the lives she had destroyed, including her own. I feel sad that she never found a way to be a person worth loving instead of a person worth fearing, I said finally. Sarah nodded. That's very generous of you. It's not generous. It's just true. Melissa could have had a good life if she had chosen to work for what she wanted instead of stealing it. She could have been loved if she had learned to love other people instead of just using them. David walked up from the pasture, his face flushed from the afternoon heat and his hands dirty from honest work. When he saw Sarah, he tensed up slightly, old habits from his months as a criminal defendant. It's okay, son, I told him. Sarah's here as a friend, not a police officer. I showed him the newspaper article. He read it twice, his expression unreadable. I should feel something, he said finally. Relief, or satisfaction, or something. But I just feel empty. That's normal, Sarah said. Melissa was a part of your life for 3 years. Even though she was manipulating you, even though she was planning to kill your mother, she was still someone you thought you loved. I did love her, David said quietly. Or at least, I loved who I thought she was. The woman she pretended to be when she wanted something from me. And that's the tragedy, I said. She was so busy being a predator that she never gave anyone the chance to love the real her. We'll never know if there was anything worth loving underneath all that calculation and cruelty. That evening, after Sarah left and David went home to his small apartment in town, I sat on my front porch with a cup of real chamomile tea, the kind that tasted like comfort instead of poison, and thought about the strange journey that had brought me to this place. 18 months ago, I had been a forgotten old woman whose own family saw her as an obstacle to their financial goals. I had been weak, isolated, and preparing to fade away quietly into whatever end they had planned for me. Now, at 74 years old, I was stronger than I had ever been. I had a purpose that got me out of bed every morning. I had work that mattered and people who valued what I had to offer. I had survived attempted murder and turned it into a mission to help other people survive similar attacks. But most importantly, I had learned something about myself that I had forgotten during the long, lonely years after Richard's death. I was worth fighting for. The next morning, Jake knocked on my door with a cup of coffee and a grin that usually meant he had news. Miss Rose, I got a call from a reporter in Houston. She says there's a group of elderly folks down there who've heard about what you did, and they want you to come speak to them about recognizing financial abuse. When? Next weekend, if you're up for it. But here's the interesting part. One of the women who's organizing it is Linda Chen. Robert Chen's daughter. The connection felt right somehow. Robert Chen had been Melissa's first victim, and his daughter had become one of my strongest supporters in the work I was doing to prevent other families from experiencing similar tragedies. Tell Linda I'll be there. There's one more thing, Jake said, his grin getting even wider. She said they want to present you with some kind of award. The Robert Chen Memorial Award for Courage in Elder Advocacy. I felt tears spring to my eyes. An award named for the man whose death had helped solve my own case, presented by the daughter who had fought for 25 years to get justice for her father. Jake, do you think Richard would be proud of what we've built here? Miss Rose, I think Mr. Richard is probably bragging to every angel in heaven about what his wife accomplished. I think he's telling them about the woman who refused to go quietly, who turned her own attempted murder into a crusade to help other folks. That afternoon, I walked out to the pasture where Richard was buried, carrying fresh wildflowers and a letter I had written to him. My dearest Richard. It's been a year since I read your last letter to me, the one that gave me the strength and resources to fight back against the people who tried to take me away from you. I want you to know that your final gift to me wasn't just the money you left. It was the reminder that I was worth protecting, worth fighting for, worth saving. Because of your love and your foresight, I survived. Because of your example of courage, I found my own courage. Because of your belief in my strength, I discovered strength I didn't know I had. The ranch is thriving under the trust we created. Your money is helping people all across the country stand up to family members who see them as obstacles instead of human beings. And David, our boy, is growing into the man you always knew he could be. He's learned from his mistakes, and he's working every day to earn back the trust he lost. But most of all, Richard, I want you to know that I'm truly happy. Not just surviving, but thriving. Not just existing, but living with purpose and passion. The door to my new life opened wide when I decided to fight for myself. I'm no longer just surviving, I'm helping other people learn to thrive. Thank you for loving me enough to protect me even after death. Thank you for believing I was strong enough to win this fight. I love you more than all the stars in the Oklahoma sky, just like you taught me. Your devoted wife, Rose. As the sun set over the pastures that Richard and I had loved together, I felt a peace deeper than anything I had experienced since his death. Not the peace of resignation or acceptance of defeat, but the peace of a battle won and a life reclaimed. I was Rose Williams, survivor, advocate, and warrior. I had faced down a serial killer and lived to tell the story. I had turned my own victimization into a weapon to protect other people from similar predators. At 74 years old, I was just getting started. Walking back to the house, I saw David's truck pulling into the driveway. He got out carrying a grocery bag and wearing the easy smile of a man who had found his way back to himself. "Hey, Mama. I brought ingredients for your famous chocolate cake. Thought we could make it together like we used to when I was little." "I'd like that, son." As we worked side by side in the kitchen, measuring flour and melting chocolate, I thought about second chances and the power of forgiveness. Not the kind of forgiveness that excuses terrible behavior, but the kind that allows people to earn their way back to love through genuine change and consistent effort. David had proven himself over the past year. He had testified truthfully against Melissa. He had sought professional help for the weaknesses that had made him vulnerable to manipulation. He had worked honestly and humbly to rebuild his relationship with me. He would never again be the innocent son who had never betrayed me. But he could be something perhaps more valuable, a son who had learned from his mistakes and chosen to become a better man. "Mama," he said as we waited for the cake to bake, "I want you to know something." "What's that?" "I'm proud of you. I'm proud of how you fought back, how you turned something terrible into something that helps other people. I'm proud to be your son, even though I know I don't deserve to be. David, you are my son. That will never change. But you're also a grown man who makes his own choices. Keep making good ones." The timer went off, and we pulled the chocolate cake out of the oven. It was perfect, golden brown and smelling like every birthday and celebration from David's childhood. As we sat on the front porch eating cake and watching the stars come out over Oklahoma, I realized that I had traveled full circle. Not back to where I started, but to a place that was somehow both familiar and completely new. I was home. I was safe. I was loved. And I was exactly where I belonged. The door to my new life had opened wide, and I had walked through it with my head held high. I was no longer just a spectator in my own story, I was the author of my own ending. And this ending was just the beginning. Thanks for watching. If Rose's story inspired you, hit that like button and subscribe for more stories of transformation and triumph. What does it take for someone to truly reclaim their power after betrayal? Share your thoughts below. If this story touched your heart, hit that like button. Subscribe for more stories that prove it's never too late to fight for yourself and stand up to people who try to tear you down. Tell me in the comments what aspect of Rose's journey inspired you most. And remember, the most powerful transformation doesn't rescue you from your life, it shows you the strength that's been there all along.